I heard my baby cry change in a way I had never heard before. It was not hungry. It was not tired. It was not a wet diaper. It was a sharp, broken sound like her throat had tightened from fear. It hit me so hard that my hands went cold before my mind understood why. I moved before I even looked at my wife. The kitchen floor felt slick under my socks. The whole house had been quiet, the kind of quiet that almost felt normal. The kettle had been warming. A dish towel had been hanging over the oven handle. My wife had been standing at the counter with a cup of tea, her shoulders finally not tense for once. The baby had been in the back bedroom, down the hall, behind the door we always kept locked. That cry cut through everything again, higher now, frantic. It sounded like she could not get enough air. My wife's face changed. Her eyes went wide and hard at the same time. She did not ask what it was. She did not call the baby's name. She just moved. We ran into the hall together. The bungalow felt smaller than ever, like the walls had pulled in. The air smelled like dust and warm paint and something sour from old carpet. The baby's room door sat at the end of the hall, solid wood, reinforced, with a metal plate around the lock. We had put that door in ourselves. We had paid extra for the frame. We had drilled longer screws into the hinges. We had done it because a normal door did not mean safety in our house. The door was shut, the lock was turned. My stomach dropped because I knew we had locked it from the outside. I knew we had done it on purpose. I knew we had done it to keep someone out. I grabbed the knob and twisted anyway. It did not give. The baby cried again, and this time it was a choking sound that made my vision blur at the edges. "Key," my wife said, and her voice sounded too calm, like a wire pulled tight. I patted my pockets like a fool. Nothing. I slapped my hand against my jeans again, then checked the back pocket, then the front. The baby cried in short, violent bursts, and I could hear the crib bars rattle like she was kicking against them. My wife went straight to the small hook we had screwed into the hall trim. The spare key should have been there. It was not. For 1 second, my mind tried to pretend it had fallen. My mind tried to pretend it was under the shoe rack. My mind tried to pretend it had slid behind the baseboard. Then I heard a sound from inside the room, a soft scrape, metal against wood. My wife and I looked at each other without speaking. We both understood the same thing at the same time. Someone was in there with her. Someone had gotten in and then locked the door. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my own breath. I ran to the kitchen drawer where we kept the other key, the one we told ourselves was for emergencies only. The drawer stuck for a second, swollen from humidity, and I yanked it hard enough that it slammed open and silverware jumped. I grabbed the key ring with fingers that did not feel like mine and sprinted back. My wife stood close to the door, her head tilted, listening like an animal listens. The baby's cry had turned into a thin, steady scream, the kind that meant pain. I shoved the key into the lock. It scraped. I missed the slot and hit the metal plate. I tried again. My wrist twisted, my knuckles hit the door, and the pain did not register. I forced the key in and turned. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open, and the air from the room came out cold and stale, like it had been held shut too long. The baby's crib sat against the far wall. The curtains were half drawn and the morning light made pale stripes on the carpet. The crib mobile hung still. The baby was on her back, red-faced, mouth open, making that terrified, endless sound. One of her tiny arms jerked up and down like she was trying to swat something away. And there was my son. He stood between the crib and the door, blocking the space like he owned it. He was a teenager then, taller than his mother, all sharp angles and tense muscles. His hair looked uncombed. His eyes were fixed on the baby, not on me. He held a kitchen knife in his right hand, the blade angled down toward the crib. I saw a thin smear of red on the white crib rail. I saw small marks on the baby's skin, little lines that did not belong there. My breath stopped. My brain tried to refuse the shape of what I was seeing. It was my son. It was my daughter. It was my locked door. It was my knife from my kitchen. I had one clear thought, simple and brutal. If I did the wrong thing in the next second, my baby might die. And right behind that came another thought, just as clear, and it shamed me even as it arrived. If I did the right thing for my baby, I did not know what would happen to my son. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My wife stepped past me into the room. Here is the hard part. This was not the first warning sign. We had wanted him. That part mattered because later people looked at me like I had been waiting for an excuse to hate my own child. I had not. When my wife told me she was pregnant, I had felt light in my chest. We had picked names like it was a promise. We had talked about a small yard, a swing set, first day of school photos. We had talked about him like he was already safe in our arms. The day he came home, I had carried him into our little bungalow like he was made of glass. He was tiny, warm, and real. My wife had watched his face like she could memorize it and keep him forever. For a short time, we lived inside that feeling. It was the kind of love that made the rest of the world look far away. Then the crying started, and it did not stop. At first it sounded normal, the sharp cry of a newborn, the kind everyone warned us about. We told each other it meant he was healthy. We told each other we just needed to learn him. We fed him, burped him, rocked him. We walked the hallway until our legs shook. We checked his diaper over and over, even when we knew it was clean. My wife warmed bottles, cooled bottles, changed formulas, changed nipples, changed positions. I held him against my shoulder until my shirt was damp. The crying stayed. It became the background of our house. It filled the kitchen, the bedroom, the bath. It followed us room to room like smoke. It was not a small complaint. It was not even anger. It sounded like panic, like something inside him could not settle, like he was falling all the time. We tried the things people suggested with bright faces and empty advice. We drove him in the car at night, slow circles through dark streets, the dashboard light cutting my wife's tired face into hard angles. We bounced him on our knees until our backs hurt. We swaddled him tight, then loose, then not at all. We played soft music. We kept the house silent. We kept lights low. We kept lights bright. We put him in a swing. We put him on our chests. We let him cry for a few minutes because someone told us he had to learn. We picked him up again because it felt like leaving him on the floor. Nothing lasted. Sleep turned into something we chased in pieces. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. I would wake up with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. My wife would fall asleep sitting up, her arms around him, and I would shake her awake because I was terrified she would drop him. We began to move slowly, not from calm, but from exhaustion. Every sound in the house became sharp. The phone ringing felt like an attack. A neighbor's dog barking made my wife cry, not from sadness, but from being pushed past the edge. We went to doctors because we needed someone official to tell us what to do. They weighed him, they checked his ears, they pressed his belly, they asked about feeding, they asked about our stress. They said words like colic. They said some bobbies cried more than others. They said it would pass. They gave us mild medicines, then different ones. They suggested changing milk, then changing it again. They asked if my wife was depressed, as if her body had made this sound and her mind had chosen it. We left those appointments with pamphlets and false hope. In the car, my wife would stare straight ahead and say nothing. I would grip the steering wheel until my fingers went white. We both kept waiting for the part where it got better, because everyone said it got better. At home, the crying kept rewriting our lives. Friends stopped coming by after a while. They would stand in the doorway, tense smiles, eyes darting toward the noise, and then they would say, "Call us if you need anything," and they would disappear. Family offered to help, but they could not handle him for long. They would hand him back after 10 minutes with wide eyes, as if the sound had touched something primal in them. Some hinted that we were doing something wrong. Some asked if we spoiled him. Some looked at my wife like her body had failed. My wife and I stopped talking like a couple and started talking like a crisis team, who had slept last, who could hold him for the next hour, who could wash bottles, who could go to work. We snapped at each other for breathing too loud. We apologized and meant it and then snapped again. Our love did not vanish. It got buried under constant noise and constant fear. Because after a while it stopped feeling like a phase. Bobby's cried, yes, but this was not a normal difficult baby. This was day after day of a child who seemed unable to be comforted. There were moments when he would go quiet, and those moments did not feel peaceful. They felt like he was gathering breath. I remembered one night in particular because it scared me more than the rest. I held him in the living room with all the lights off, rocking in a chair that squeaked, the house hot from summer air we could not afford to cool. His face was red and wet. He screamed until he gagged and then screamed again. I tried to hum, my voice shaking. My wife stood in the doorway, hair messy, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. She whispered, "What does he want?" And I had no answer, not food, not warmth, not touch, not quiet, not motion, not anything we could give. That was the first crack. The moment I understood that love and effort did not guarantee safety, that a baby could be held perfectly and still sound like he was being harmed, that we could do everything right and still fail. My wife started keeping notes because a nurse suggested it. Times he ate, times he slept, times he cried. The page filled until it looked like a ledger for a debt we could not pay. I started counting hours in my head, not because it helped, but because it gave me something to hold onto besides panic. People said, "Enjoy this time." I wanted to grab them and force them to listen for 1 hour. We did not hate him. We feared what we could not fix. We feared what it meant that nothing soothed him. We feared the look we sometimes saw in each other, the quick flash of anger that came from being trapped and powerless. We feared ourselves almost as much as we feared the sound. This did not start at the knife. It started in the crib. And the worst part was that one day, the crying finally eased. It thinned out. It came in shorter bursts. We got a full night of sleep and woke up confused, like survivors who had not heard the siren yet. We thought it meant we had made it through. We thought the hard year was ending. But the crying did not leave our house. It only changed form. It faded into silence and something colder took its place. When the crying eased, I expected relief. What I got was a quiet that felt wrong, like a room after an accident. He did not become peaceful. He became watchful. Even as a toddler, he stared too long, like he measured people instead of looking at them. As soon as he could move with purpose, the house started to break. He pulled books from shelves just to tear pages. He threw toys hard enough to crack plastic. He pushed chairs into tables until the legs wobbled. If something made noise when it fell, he did it again, not laughing, not upset, just focused. I patched holes in the wall before I understood how they got there. I replaced light switch plates like they were disposable. Our home stopped feeling like a place where children grew. It felt like a place we repaired after storms. Then came the mess that no one wanted to hear about, the kind that made other parents look away. He smeared his own waste on the bathroom wall. He hid it behind furniture. He pressed it into carpet. Sometimes he did it quietly while we were in the next room. Sometimes he waited until we were busy, like he understood timing. Cleaning, it was not just work. It was humiliation. It was the smell that stayed in your nose even after you washed your hands twice. It was my wife scrubbing until her knuckles split, her face blank like she had left her body to get through it. We tried to treat it like a phase. We tried to treat it like a problem to solve. We changed routines. We watched him closer. We praised every normal thing he did like it was a miracle. We took things away. We gave things back. We made charts. We read parenting books that promised simple answers. We argued late at night in whispers, not about love, but about blame. My wife thought I was too soft. I thought she was too hard. The truth was that neither of us knew what we were doing and every choice felt wrong. The first time he hurt me on purpose, I convinced myself it had been an accident. He was small and I was bigger and it was easy to excuse. A sudden headbutt, teeth on my arm, fingernails raked across my cheek, a cup thrown at my face. I told myself he did not understand. I told myself he was frustrated. I told myself it would pass if we stayed calm. But it did not feel like confusion. It felt like testing. He bit until skin broke. He kicked when I tried to pick him up. He scratched at my eyes. He spit in my face and watched to see what I would do. When my wife tried to restrain him, he went for her throat with both hands, small fingers pressing hard like he meant it. We stopped using certain words around him. We stopped turning our backs. We started speaking in short sentences, careful ones, like you spoke to an unpredictable dog. The house was full of sharp corners, and I began to see every object as something he could use. School did not fix anything. It made it visible. The calls started early. He hit another child. He threw a chair. He ran out of the classroom. He kicked a teacher. He screamed for an hour and could not be calmed. We drove to the school so many times that the office staff stopped looking surprised. They looked tired, like we were part of a problem they could not solve. They moved him to a different class, then a different room, then a separated environment with fewer children and more adults. They used words like behavior plan and support. They told us they were doing their best. They asked what we did at home as if home was the place where rules worked. At home, rules were just more things he could break. He grew and his strength came faster than his self-control. A tantrum from a small child could be contained. A tantrum from a bigger child became violence. He learned where it hurt. He learned how to get a reaction. He learned that fear made people move. We sought help the way drowning people grabbed at anything. Doctors, specialists, psychologists, psychiatrists, meetings in small rooms with clocks that ticked too loud, forms, tests, more forms. We answered questions that felt impossible because how did you describe your own child without sounding like a monster or a liar? We described what he did. We described what we feared. We described how tired we were. People nodded and wrote notes. They offered diagnoses that changed over the years. They offered medication that changed with the diagnoses. Some things improved for a week. Some things improved for a month. Then the pattern returned like it had been waiting. He learned to hide certain behaviors from professionals. He learned to sit still when someone watched. He learned to smile at the right time. He learned to become someone else in those rooms. Then he came home and made sure we knew the difference. The first time I found a knife missing from the kitchen, I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was not that knives were special. It was that they were honest. You could not explain them away. A knife was not an accident. A knife was not a tantrum. A knife was a decision. We searched the house. We lifted couch cushions. We checked vents. We checked under beds. We checked the toy box and the bathroom cabinet. He watched us from the hallway like he enjoyed the way we moved, fast and quiet like prey. We found it days later, wrapped in an old towel in his closet. After that, I counted knives without thinking. I did it while talking. I did it while tired. I did it while pretending to be normal for guests. I did it because the alternative was to accept that a weapon could disappear in my home and I would not know where it was. Then came the night I learned how quickly a kitchen could turn into a scene I could not forget. I had heard a noise, a sharp clatter, and I had stepped toward it without thinking. He was older then, taller, with a body that moved fast when he wanted. The light in the kitchen was on. The air smelled like dish soap and leftovers. I saw the knife in his hand and I saw his face, calm and set. I said his name. I did not shout. I tried to keep my voice steady. He came at me like he had already decided. I put my arms up. I felt a hard impact, then a hot sting, then warmth running down my forearm. For a second my mind refused it. Then I saw the blood. It spread in a thin sheet, bright under the kitchen light. My wife screamed behind me, a sound that did not belong to her. He stepped back and watched me press my hand against the cut. He did not look scared. He did not look sorry. He looked curious, like he wanted to see what happened next. I got stitches. I told people it had been an accident. I told them he had tripped while I was cooking. I did not want questions I could not survive. I did not want men in uniforms walking through our house, opening doors, judging us, deciding what kind of parents we were. I also did not want my son to learn what it felt like when outsiders got involved. I did not want him to feel cornered. So we handled it ourselves, and the handling changed us. We removed anything that could be used quickly. We locked up tools. We kept medication hidden. We stopped leaving scissors on tables. We stopped leaving keys in locks. We slept lighter. We listened harder. We moved through our own home like we were trespassing. And then we remodeled the inside of our bungalow, not for comfort, but for defense. We replaced interior doors with heavier ones. We reinforced frames. We installed locks that needed keys, not simple turn knobs. We made a safe room without calling it that. We put the spare keys where we could reach them fast. We practiced in our heads how to move, where to stand, how to get out. By then, locks were not about control. They were about surviving the day. From the outside, we still looked like a family. Inside, we lived around one person's moods like they were whether sudden and violent. Every meal, every evening, every hallway trip carried a question. Would he let us pass? Would he follow? Would he explode? Would he smile and then strike? We kept asking for help. We kept showing up. We kept taking advice and pills and plans. And after years of all of it, nothing changed. My wife found out she was pregnant again on a morning that already felt heavy. She stood in the bathroom with the door half shut, like she expected someone to burst in and ruin it. When she told me, her voice sounded careful, not bright. I remembered staring at her hands, not her face, because my first feeling was not joy. It was dread. We had not planned it, not after all those years. Not after the locks, the stitched wound on my arm, and the quiet ways we had learned to move around our own son. We had stopped talking about another baby the way people stopped talking about a vacation they could not afford. It was easier to pretend the idea had died on its own. My wife sat at the kitchen table and held the mug with both hands even though the tea was too hot. I watched her shoulders rise and fall. I wanted to say congratulations, because that was what a husband was supposed to say. I wanted to say we could do this because that was what father said. Instead, I asked, very softly, what we were going to do. That question made her look up fast. Her eyes hardened, not at me exactly, but at the idea behind the question. She had lived in a house that felt like a threat for so long that her kindness had become something she guarded. She said she was keeping the baby. She said it like she had decided before she even told me. I did not argue at first. I sat down across from her and listened to the refrigerator hum, and I imagined a second crib in our home. I imagined a second helpless body. I imagined my son watching us hold it. That night we talked in whispers in our bedroom with the door locked. The same locked door that had once felt like a strange precaution. By then, it felt like a rule of nature. We listed options the way people listed exits during a fire. We said words we hated: termination, adoption, placement, safety plan. We did not say them loudly because it felt like speaking them could bring punishment. We did not say them around our son because he listened even when he pretended not to. My wife refused to end the pregnancy. She did not cry. She did not soften it. She said she could not live with that choice. She said she had already lived with enough darkness. She said she wanted one thing in our home that was not shaped by fear. I tried to explain my terror without insulting her hope. I told her I could not survive another child like him. I told her I had watched him hurt people and enjoy the control. I told her I feared what he would do to a baby, and I feared what I might do if I saw it. When I admitted that, my voice cracked, not from sadness, from shame. My wife reached across the table and gripped my wrist, right where the scar sat under my sleeve. She squeezed once, hard, like she was anchoring me to the truth. She said we were not the problem. She said we had done everything anyone could do. She said if this baby showed even a hint of the same pattern, we would not pretend it was fine. We would not wait years. We would not let love become a cage. She said we could consider adoption if we saw it early. Hearing her say that felt like stepping onto ice. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt disgust with myself for feeling relief. I had loved my son once. I had rocked him. I had kissed his forehead. I had sworn I would protect him. And there I was, agreeing to a plan that sounded like a quiet kind of abandonment. I told myself it was not abandonment. I told myself it was responsibility. I told myself it was the only way to keep a new baby safe if the worst happened again. Time moved, slow and sharp. We did not celebrate the pregnancy the way we had with our first. We did not paint a nursery with excitement. We prepared like people prepared for a storm that might hit or might pass by. We kept appointments. We listened to doctors. We smiled at nurses and kept our real faces for the car ride home. Our son noticed everything. He watched my wife's growing belly with a look I could not read. He made comments that sounded harmless if you did not know him. He asked questions about where the baby would sleep. He asked if the baby would cry a lot. He asked if we would still have time for him. He asked it all with a flat voice, like he was studying a new object in the house. The closer we got to the birth, the quieter my wife became. She kept busy, cleaning and organizing, but her eyes stayed alert. At night she slept with one hand on her stomach like she could shield the baby through skin and bone. I lay awake and listened for our son's footsteps in the hall. When our daughter was born, the world shifted in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. She came out small and pink and loud in a normal way. Her cry sounded like protest, not terror. When the nurse placed her in my wife's arms, my wife broke for the first time in months. She did not sob. Tears just rolled down her face in silence while she stared at the baby like she had been starving and finally saw food. Our daughter slept. She woke, she ate, she looked around with calm eyes, and she slept again. The quiet around her did not feel wrong. It felt like peace. It felt like a room where the air was not poisoned. At home, we held her and waited for the non-stop screaming to start. It did not. Days passed, then weeks. She gained weight. She made soft baby sounds. She startled at loud noises like a normal infant. She relaxed against my chest like she trusted the world. Each normal moment hit me like a shock because I realized how little normal we had ever had. For the first time, we saw what normal could feel like. Relief did not arrive like a celebration. It arrived like a drug. It made my body loosen in places I did not know were tight. It made my wife's shoulders drop when she thought no one was watching. It made us laugh quietly in the kitchen over nothing, just because we could. And without meaning to, we shifted. The baby became the center of the house. Her feeding schedule, her naps, her doctor visits. We built our hours around her because she was fragile and good and ordinary felt sacred. When we looked at her, we did not see a threat. We saw a chance. Our son saw it too. He watched us from doorways. He listened when we spoke softly to her. He watched my wife kiss the top of her head. He watched me rock her in the living room with the lights low, the way I had once tried to rock him. At first he said nothing. Then he started to push, small at first, like a finger against a bruise. And then, as the weeks went on, he turned his attention toward our new piece with a focus that made my stomach sink. Because he noticed the shift, and he did not let it stay gentle. He made sure we felt him again. After my daughter arrived, my son did not soften. He sharpened. It started with small things that were meant to be heard. A door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. A chair dragged across the floor in the middle of the night. Loud music turned on and left on, not because he liked it, but because we hated it. He spoke to the baby in a voice that sounded sweet from the hallway. Then he looked at me and let the sweetness drop away like a mask. My wife tried to keep rules. I tried to keep peace. Neither of us could do both. Every day held the same question. Would he ignore us or would he pull us into a fight? It usually happened in the kitchen because the kitchen was where the knives were and where the sounds carried. He would walk in while my wife fed the baby, and my wife's body would change the moment she saw him. Her shoulders lifted. Her jaw set. Her hands moved closer to the baby without thinking. It happened so fast it looked like instinct, not choice. He noticed that too. He would step closer, not touching, just invading. He would smirk like he owned the air. My wife would tell him to back up. He would ask why. She would repeat it. He would laugh once, quiet, and then he would say something designed to start a fire. Sometimes he insulted the baby. Sometimes he insulted my wife. Sometimes he insulted me in a way that made me see red for half a second, and that half second scared me more than his words. He wanted us to react. He wanted proof he could still move us like strings. The screaming matches became daily. They did not build up slowly. They started like a slap. My wife shouted first more often than I wanted to admit, because she lived on a short fuse by then. I tried to calm her, but my voice sounded weak in that room. My son would talk over both of us, loud and cruel, and when I stepped between them he would lean around me and keep going, like I was furniture. The baby would startle and cry, and that cry would set my wife off even more. She took it personally, like our son had reached through the baby to punish her. I began to avoid leaving the baby alone. It was not a rule we spoke out loud. It was a new habit that formed without discussion. If my wife went to the bathroom, I held the baby. If I took a shower, my wife stood in the doorway with the baby in her arms. We did not say we were afraid of our own son. We just moved like fear was normal. I hated what that did to us. I hated that I looked at my daughter and felt relief instead of simple love. She was calm. She slept. She laughed. She reached for our faces and trusted us. With her, I could pretend we were normal for a few minutes at a time. That pretending felt like oxygen. Then my son would walk in, and the oxygen would vanish. He started leaving the house for hours. At first it scared me, because I pictured him somewhere else hurting someone or getting hurt. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. When the front door shut and his footsteps faded down the walk, my body relaxed. Not happiness, not peace, relief, the kind you felt when a dangerous storm moved away from your street. I would stand at the window and watch him go, and part of me would count how long we might have until he came back. An hour, 2, maybe overnight. Each extra minute felt like a gift, and the fact that I felt that way about my own child made me sick. My wife felt it too, and she hated it even more than I did. She tried to cover it with anger because anger felt less shameful than relief. When my son returned, she reacted like an alarm had gone off. Her eyes snapped to his hands first, always his hands. Her voice came out sharp. She did not ask where he had been. She demanded it like a guard at a gate. My son learned to use the doorway as a weapon. He would step in and just stand there, letting his presence fill the room. My wife would freeze for a fraction of a second, and he would enjoy that fraction. Then he would toss a comment over his shoulder, something about the baby being spoiled, something about us replacing him, something about how he could do whatever he wanted. Sometimes he brushed past my wife too close on purpose, shoulder to shoulder, and my wife would flinch like she had been burned. Once I saw her hands lift, not into fists but into a boxer's guard. It happened without thought. She caught herself and dropped them, but the message stayed in the air. She expected a fight every time he came near. So did I. There were nights when he did not come home at all. I should have called the police. I should have called someone. Instead, I locked the doors, checked the windows, and listened to the silence like it was a lullaby. Then I lay in bed beside my wife and felt her breathing slow, and I felt mine slow too. This was where the story became uncomfortable. Relief started to feel like safety. And because it felt like safety, we started chasing it. We stopped trying to fix him the way we once had. We stopped begging. We stopped believing the next appointment would change anything. We managed him. We avoided him. We outlasted each day. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he would grow up and leave. I told myself we could keep the baby protected until then. I told myself anything that let me sleep. But our home did not forget what he was capable of. The lock stayed on the doors. The key stayed on its hook. My scar stayed on my arm. And the baby's crib stayed in the back bedroom like a promise we could not defend with promises. Then came the morning when my son did come home, and the air felt wrong before he even spoke. He walked in with his face tight and his eyes bright, like he had not slept. My wife said something to him that I did not even catch. He answered with a tone that made the hair on my arms lift. The argument ignited so fast it felt planned. Words turned into shouting. Shouting turned into my wife stepping forward and my son stepping forward right back. I stood there with the baby in my arms, watching them, and I had a clear thought that scared me. If this kept going, something was going to break for good. My son suddenly grabbed his jacket and stormed out. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the hallway mirror. I waited for the familiar relief to settle into my chest. It did for a moment. Then the house went too quiet, and the quiet did not feel like peace. It felt like a pause before impact. And later that same morning, my daughter made a sound from the back bedroom that erased every other sound I had ever heard. People imagined we locked our son away like a prisoner. We did not. We locked ourselves away from him. That difference mattered because it explained why a key decided who lived and who bled. He moved freely through the house. He ate when he wanted. He slept where he wanted. He could stand in the hallway outside our bedroom door and listen to us breathe. The locked doors were for us. They were the thin line between a normal moment and the next emergency. We kept keys like other families kept photographs. There was a hook in the hallway trim, placed high so a child could not reach it. There was a spare in the kitchen drawer, behind a stack of towels, because we did not want it visible. There was one on my key ring that never left my pocket, even in the house. I slept with it beside the bed more than once, cold metal against my palm, because I feared waking up and needing it fast. Every day became a series of checks. Before I went to work, I counted the knives. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet scan of the block on the counter like a habit. I checked drawers that held scissors. I checked the toolbox. If something was missing, I did not ask casually. I asked like someone asked when the smoke alarm beeped. Where was it? When had anyone last seen it? Why was it not where it belonged? My wife controlled the sharp objects the way a nurse controlled medication. She did not do it to punish him. She did it because we had learned what happened when we assumed the house was safe. She kept blades higher than he should have been able to reach, even when he was already tall enough to reach them. She hid matches. She hid lighters. She put cleaning chemicals up and then higher because he had drunk from a bottle once just to watch her panic. We stopped leaving doors open. We closed the bathroom door even when it was empty. We shut the laundry room. We kept the baby's room shut at all times, not because the baby needed quiet, but because we needed a barrier. We taught ourselves to turn handles gently, so we could hear if someone had tampered with a lock. We listened for the small click of the latch, the way someone listened for a gun to be set down on a table. At night, the house sounded different. Normal houses settled, pipes ticked, floors creaked. Our house had those sounds too, but we heard them through fear. A creak could be him. A shift of weight could be him. A soft thud could be him testing a door. My wife and I lay in bed and did not move for long stretches, just listening. Sometimes we counted seconds between sounds. Sometimes we held our breath without realizing it. The baby's sleep should have been a gentle thing. In our home, it became a tactical decision. When she napped, we did not leave her in the living room like other parents did. We did not set her down and walk away. We brought her into our bedroom and locked the door from the inside. We placed her bassinet near the bed where we could see her chest rise and fall. We kept the monitor on even though the room was right there, because the monitor let us hear if the door handle rattled. We moved through the house with the baby like we moved through a crowd with a wallet. Close, protected, always aware of hands. If my wife needed to shower, I stood outside the bathroom with the baby and listened for our son. If I needed to use the toilet, my wife waited in the hall. Even doing something as simple as making a bottle required planning, because the kitchen was where the knives lived, and the kitchen was where he liked to appear without warning. We did not call it a safe room, but that was what it was. The baby's bedroom became a fortress we never fully trusted. We reinforced the frame. We added a lock that needed a key, not a simple latch. We told ourselves it was to keep him out, but the truth was uglier. The truth was that we feared what he could do in seconds, and we feared what we would do if we saw it happening. When you needed a key to reach your own child, something was already broken. And the worst part was how normal it started to feel. I got used to the weight of keys in my pocket. I got used to checking the hook in the hallway like it was a heartbeat. I got used to my wife placing herself between our son and the baby without speaking. I got used to the way my own body tensed when I heard his footsteps, because his steps had a pattern when he was calm and a different pattern when he was hunting for a reaction. We did not live like parents, we lived like guards. It made us smaller people. It made us tired people. It made us the kind of adults who flinched at sounds that should have meant nothing. And it made us quiet because if we spoke too freely, we argued, and if we argued, he listened, and if he listened, he used it. So we built rules without writing them down. Never leave the baby alone. Never leave a sharp object out. Always know where the keys were. Always lock a door behind you. Always check the windows before bed because he had climbed out once just to prove he could and climbed back in later like a ghost returning to its own house. Then came the morning when the system should have worked. There had been another fight, harsh words. The front door slammed. Our son stormed out, angry and loud, the way he did when he wanted the whole street to hear him. My wife stood in the kitchen holding the baby, shaking with leftover adrenaline. I watched through the window until he disappeared down the block. He was supposed to be gone. And because he was supposed to be gone, my wife finally did something we almost never did. She put the baby down for a nap in the back bedroom and locked the door from the outside, like it was a simple precaution. That decision only made sense if you believed the danger had left the house. The fight that morning burned hot and fast, like most of our fights did by then. My son stood in the kitchen with his face tight and his eyes bright, and my wife matched him word for word until her voice turned sharp enough to cut. I tried to talk over them, not to win, just to lower the temperature, but my voice disappeared between theirs. He accused us of treating him like a stranger. My wife accused him of acting like a threat. He laughed at that, one short sound that made my stomach drop, because it meant he knew she was right and did not care. The baby started to fuss in my wife's arms. My wife bounced her gently, trying to keep her calm while still shouting at our son. That mix of tenderness and fury looked wrong on her, like two people sharing the same skin. My son stepped closer to her, and my wife backed up without realizing she had done it. I saw it happen and I hated it. I hated him for making her move like that. I hated myself for letting our home turn into a place where my wife backed away from her own child. Then, as suddenly as it started, my son ended it. He grabbed his jacket from the chair, shoved his feet into his shoes, and stormed out. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass in the cabinet. For a moment, the whole house vibrated. Then it went still. That stillness hit me like a wave. I stood in the kitchen and waited for the next sound because the next sound always came. Another door slam, another insult from the hallway, the scrape of something being dragged, but nothing followed. The silence held. My wife stared at the door he had used, her chest rising fast. Then she looked down at the baby like she had remembered she was there. Her face softened in a way that felt almost painful to witness. She kissed the baby's forehead once, slow and careful, like she wanted to erase the shouting from the air. We did not talk about what had just happened. We never did. Talking made it real, and real made it heavier. My wife carried the baby toward the back bedroom. I followed without thinking, watching the hallway corners, listening for any movement above the hum of the refrigerator and the dull thump of my own pulse. She laid the baby in the crib and adjusted the blanket. The baby's eyes fluttered, then closed. It looked so normal that it almost tricked me. My wife stepped back, and for a second she stood there just looking at her, like she could not believe a quiet child belonged to us. Then she closed the bedroom door and locked it from the outside. I heard the click. It was a small sound. It should have meant safety. We went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table, not facing each other, just sharing the same space. The air smelled like warm milk and old coffee. My hands shook slightly, the leftover adrenaline draining out, and I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to hide it. My wife reached up and rubbed her forehead with 2 fingers. She did not speak. I did not either. There was a silent agreement between us, the kind that did not need words. Enjoy the peace while it lasted. That was what we had become. 2 people trained to grab happiness in short, stolen pieces. Outside, the street sounded normal. A distant car, a bird, someone closing a gate. Those sounds felt far away, like they belonged to another family's life. I watched the hallway that led to the back bedroom. I knew the door was locked. I knew the key was on the hook. I knew our son had left. I knew all the things I told myself when I wanted to believe the system worked. My wife exhaled, long and slow. Her shoulders dropped a little. I felt my own body follow her, loosening in places that had been clenched for years. Then the baby cried. At first it was a normal cry, thin and sleepy, the kind that meant she had shifted in the crib and did not like it. My wife started to rise from her chair, half automatic, and I reached for the hallway key without looking. But before she even took a step, the cry changed. It sharpened into something else. It stretched higher and it carried a broken rhythm that I had never heard from her before. It did not sound like discomfort. It sounded like fear. Pure fear, the kind that did not need words. My chair scraped the floor as I stood too fast. My wife was already moving, faster than I had ever seen her move outside a ring. We ran down the hallway. The locked door waited at the end like a bad joke. My hand hit the key hook and missed on the first grab. My fingers were numb, clumsy, as if my body refused to accept what the sound meant. I grabbed again and the keys came loose, jangling loud in the tight hallway. My wife crowded close behind me, her breath loud, her whole body aimed at the door. I tried to fit the key into the lock and fumbled it, metal scraping metal. The baby screamed again, and the scream rose into a choking sound like she had no air. My wife made a noise behind me that was not a word. It was a raw sound, animal and desperate. I forced the key into the lock, turned it hard, and yanked the door open. The door swung inward. The bedroom smelled like baby powder and warm milk, and for half a second that smell made my mind refuse what my eyes saw. My son stood beside the crib. He was tall enough that his shoulders rose above the railing. One hand gripped the wood. The other held a kitchen knife, angled down toward my daughter's face. The blade caught the light from the window and flashed once, clean and ordinary, like it belonged in a drawer. My daughter lay on her back, red-faced, choking on her own screaming. Her arms jerked in short, panicked motions, too small to protect anything. Her legs kicked against the thin blanket. The sound she made was not just crying. It was terror, raw and endless. Time slowed down in the way people described after accidents. My brain tried to take inventory, like if I named the details I could control them. The crib stood tight against the wall. The mobile above it spun slightly from movement. The door behind me stayed open because I had yanked it hard. My wife's breath came fast at my shoulder. My son's hair looked unwashed. His eyes stayed fixed on the baby, not with anger, not with confusion, but with a calm focus that made my blood run cold. Then I saw the marks. My daughter's cheek and forehead had thin red lines, shallow, like scratches that had been drawn with a sharp point. A smear of fresh blood sat near her temple. It was not a deep wound. It was still enough to make my stomach drop through the floor. He had already started. My wife made a sound behind me like a broken inhale. Her body leaned forward, ready to launch. I felt her shift, and I knew she was about to move before she even did. I stepped into the room first, not as a decision but as a reflex. My hands came up, palms open, as if I could block the knife with air. I heard myself say his name, one time low and flat. My son did not flinch. He lowered the knife closer to the baby's face, slow, like he wanted us to see it clearly. The baby screamed again, and the scream hit the small room and bounced back on us. And then, with the blade still close, he dragged it along her skin. Not hard enough to open her up, hard enough to leave another line, hard enough to make her cry turn into a choking wail that sounded like pain and fear mixed together. I felt my vision narrow, the edges of the room blurred. All I saw was the knife and her face and the way his wrist moved with control. I took another step and my foot bumped the leg of a small chair near the dresser. The chair scraped the floor. The sound was small, but it broke something in him. My son looked up at me. He smiled. It was not a grin like a joke. It was not nervous. It was clean and sure, like he had waited for that moment, like the whole point was for us to see him do it. My wife moved. She did not shout first. She did not hesitate. She crossed the room in 2 steps, faster than I could process, and her arm snapped out toward his knife hand. The knife flew. It hit the wall with a sharp smack and clattered to the floor near the crib. For a fraction of a second it slid, then stopped with the blade turned toward the baseboard, as if it still wanted to crawl. My wife hit him with her shoulder and drove him sideways, away from the crib. His back struck the wall hard enough to rattle the framed picture above the dresser. The picture tilted and hung crooked. My son's eyes flashed. He reached down like he might dive for the knife. My wife's fist met his face before he could. It was a boxer's punch, clean, heavy, final. His head snapped back, then forward. He stumbled. She hit him again, higher this time, then shoved him into the wall with her forearm across his chest. Her stance widened automatically, feet planted like she had stepped into a ring without choosing it. I stood frozen for one impossible beat, watching her move with a speed I had seen only in training, but now it looked different. It looked like every year of fear had turned into one straight line of violence. Then my body caught up. I rushed to the crib. My hand shook so badly that I hit the railing once and had to grip it to steady myself. My daughter's face was wet with tears. Her mouth was open in a scream that had no pause for breathing. I lifted her out, careful and clumsy at the same time. My arm slid under her back. My other hand cupped her head. She felt impossibly light, like a bird in a storm. When I pulled her against my chest, she pressed her face into my shirt and screamed into the fabric. I felt warm spit and tears soak through. I felt her tiny fingers clutch and release, searching for something to hold onto. I turned my shoulder toward her, shielding her without thinking, and I backed away from the crib like it was still dangerous. My wife kept herself between my son and the baby, her body a barrier. Her breathing sounded harsh, like she had run miles. Her eyes stayed locked on him, wide and bright. My son's lips split. Blood showed at the corner of his mouth. He wiped it with the back of his hand and looked at the blood like it surprised him. Then his gaze flicked to the floor, to the knife near the baseboard. My wife saw the flick. She kicked the knife away in one sharp motion. It skidded under the dresser with a metallic scrape and disappeared into shadow. My son made a small sound, not pain, more like annoyance. He pushed off the wall and tried to step around her. My wife hit him again. This time he dropped to one knee. He braced a hand on the floor, trying to rise. She did not let him. She grabbed the collar of his shirt, yanked him up, and slammed him back into the wall. The impact thudded through the room. The crooked picture fell and hit the dresser with a crack. I stood there holding the baby, staring at my wife as if I had never met her. Her face was not screaming. It was not wild in the way movies showed. It was fixed, determined. A mother's face when something tried to kill her child. My daughter's crying started to break into hiccups, little gasps as she struggled to catch air. I rocked her without thinking, back and forth, back and forth. My mouth kept forming words I could not hear. My son's eyes found mine again, over my wife's shoulder. He did not look sorry. He looked angry that the moment had been interrupted. He opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe a threat, maybe a joke, maybe nothing that mattered. My wife did not wait to hear it. She struck him across the jaw with a short, tight punch that came from her hips. His head snapped sideways, he sagged, his shoulders slid down the wall. My wife stepped in closer, blocking him fully from my view. For a second all I saw was her back and the tension in her arms and the way her fists stayed raised, ready. I shifted the baby higher against my chest and turned toward the door. My instinct screamed at me to get her out, away from the knife, away from him, away from the room that now felt poisoned. But my feet did not move right away, because another instinct pulled me the other direction. Stop this. That was the word in my head. Stop this now. I watched my wife, and I knew she could hurt him badly. I knew her training. I knew what hands like hers could do when they did not hold back. I knew that if she kept going, it could cross a line that could never be uncrossed. I also knew what my son had been doing when we opened that door. I saw the thin cuts on my daughter's face. I heard that scream that did not sound like any baby cry I had ever heard. I remembered his smile. And something inside me went quiet. I had spent years begging for help and locking doors and counting knives, and telling myself I could manage him if I stayed calm. In that moment, calm left me completely, not as rage, as numbness. My wife took one more step toward him, close enough that he had nowhere to go but down. And I did not reach for her arm. I did not tell her to stop. I held my baby tighter, and I let my wife move forward without me. My wife stepped in close and hit him again, and the sound of it made my skin crawl. It did not sound like a wild slap. It sounded like a trained strike landing where it was meant to land. She had boxed for years when she was younger. I had seen her practice in gyms. I had watched her hands move with discipline and control. In that bedroom, that control turned into something else. My son lifted his arms to shield his head, not fast enough at first, like his body did not understand he was the one being hunted now. He blinked hard. His eyes watered. He looked shocked, like he had expected shouting, maybe a grab, maybe punishment later. He had not expected a mother who moved like a fighter. My wife kept punching, short and direct, her elbows tight. She did not swing wide. She did not waste motion. She hit his face, then his ribs, then his face again when he tried to turn away. Each punch came with a sharp exhale, like she had done it 1,000 times. My son slid down the wall and tried to crawl sideways away from her. He put his hands up in front of his nose and mouth, palms outward, trying to block. He made small sounds that were half words, half breath. I could not tell if he begged or cursed. It did not matter. My wife did not answer him. I stood there holding my daughter, and my body stayed split into two parts. One part wanted to pull my wife back. That part remembered rules. It remembered that you did not beat someone. It remembered that he was still our son. The other part of me watched the baby's face pressed against my shirt, and it only cared about one thing: distance, safety, air. My daughter's hiccuping cries continued, sharp and wet. I felt her tiny chest rise too fast against my own. I felt her whole body tremble like she had been shocked. I looked down and saw a thin line of blood near her eyebrow and a second line on her cheek. My hands shook so badly I had to tighten my grip just to keep her from slipping. My wife drove my son back into the corner by the dresser. He tried to cover his head with his forearms, and she hit his arms until they dropped, then hit his face again. He turned his shoulder toward her to protect his jaw, and she struck the side of his head. He tried to stand, and she shoved him down with a hard two-handed push. There was no pause, no talking, only impact and breath and my daughter's crying. I waited for myself to move. I waited for my legs to step forward. I waited for my voice to come out. Nothing happened. I did not feel brave. I did not feel calm. I felt empty, like my mind had shut a door to keep from breaking. My eyes stayed on my wife's fists, then on my son's hands, then on the crib where the knife had been, then back to my baby's cuts. I realized with a cold clarity that I did not trust my son, even on the floor. If I stepped between them, if I grabbed my wife's arm, if I tried to stop her, I pictured my son reaching past me toward the dresser, toward the shadows under it, toward the knife. I pictured my wife turning her head for 1 second, and my son using that second on the baby, or on her, or on me. 1 more second, that was all it took. My wife hit him again, and my son made a sound like air leaving a punctured bag. He curled tighter. His knees drew up. He tried to make himself small, and it looked wrong because he had never tried to be small in our house. He had always filled rooms on purpose. My daughter's cries rose again, high and frantic, as if she sensed the violence even with her face buried in my shirt. That was when I finally moved. Not toward my wife. Away. I turned and backed out of the bedroom, keeping my body between the doorway and the crib, as if I could erase the sight from my daughter's eyes. My shoulder bumped the doorframe. The sound behind me continued, dull thuds and sharp breaths, and once a short choking cough that might have been my son. I did not look back. I walked down the hallway into the kitchen, holding my daughter so tight I worried I would hurt her. My feet felt heavy and wrong, like I was walking through water. Every step away from that room felt like a betrayal and a rescue at the same time. I set my daughter down on the kitchen table on top of a folded towel because I needed both hands. She flailed and screamed, her face red and wet. I leaned close and spoke softly, words I did not choose, only sounds meant to calm. My hands reached for what we kept for cuts and burns. In our house, we had supplies ready in more than one place. We had learned not to waste time searching. I opened the cupboard and grabbed the small first aid tin. My fingers fumbled the latch twice before it opened. I wet a clean cloth at the sink and wrung it out. The water ran too loud and I flinched at the sound because it covered the sounds from the hallway. I wanted to hear everything, and I also did not want to hear any of it. I dabbed at the blood on my daughter's temple, careful and slow. The cut was thin, more like a scrape, but it made me nauseous. I cleaned her cheek next, wiping away tears and a faint pink line where the blade had dragged. She cried harder when the cloth touched her skin. I whispered apologies that meant nothing. I looked for a deeper wound and did not find one. That should have brought relief. It did not. It only made my mind replay the angle of the knife and the calm way my son had held it. I thought about calling for help. I thought about the phone on the wall. I thought about police lights in front of our bungalow and neighbors watching. I thought about questions we could not answer without telling the truth. Then I thought about my son holding a knife over a crib. My wife's background in boxing came back to me in ugly detail. I knew how to throw a punch. I had learned enough just by watching her train. I knew the difference between a shove and a strike that could break bone. My wife knew exactly where to hit. She knew how to keep balance. She knew how to keep going. I realized she might not stop on her own. And still, I did not move toward the bedroom. I did not punch, but I did not stop it. I cleaned my daughter's face again, gentler this time. Her screaming began to crack into exhausted sobs. I picked her up and held her against my chest, patting her back, trying to match my breathing to hers. I tasted salt from my own tears without remembering them starting. The noise from the bedroom carried through the hall. At first it stayed loud and clear. My wife's feet thudding on the floor, the wall taking another impact, my son making a sound, then another. Then the pattern changed. The sounds became slower, heavier, less sharp. My wife's breathing turned ragged, like she had pushed past effort into something deeper. My son's noises changed too. They stopped sounding like anger or protest. They sounded confused, then scared, then thin. I stood in the kitchen with my daughter pressed to me, staring at the hallway like it was a tunnel to another life. The key that had opened the baby's door lay on the table beside the first aid tin. I looked at it and understood with a sick calm that a piece of metal had decided everything. I listened as the screaming from the bedroom changed again. It rose once, sharp and broken, then dropped into a low sound that did not even fill the room. Then it faded. The silence that followed felt louder than the screaming had. I stood in the kitchen with my daughter against my chest, rocking her until her sobs turned into small, tired noises. The air smelled like tap water and antiseptic from the cloth I had used. My hands stayed wet. My mouth tasted like metal. I stared at the hallway and waited for my wife to come out. At first nothing moved. No footsteps, no voice, no sound at all. The house felt hollow, like it had been emptied in one violent breath. Then I heard a slow step. Another, heavy, uneven, like someone walking on a leg that did not want to work. My wife appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her hair had come loose and stuck to her face with sweat. Her knuckles looked swollen already, red and scraped. There was blood on the side of her hand and a smear on her forearm. I could not tell if it was hers or his. Her chest rose and fell too fast, and her eyes looked wide but unfocused, like she had just woken up in the wrong place. She looked at the baby first. Her gaze went straight to the thin lines on our daughter's face. Her mouth opened as if she might speak, but no sound came out. I watched her hands. I could not stop watching them. Those hands had held our daughter gently an hour before. Now they looked like weapons that had been used. My throat tightened until it hurt. When I finally spoke, my voice came out flat like it belonged to a stranger. "Is he dead?" My wife blinked once, slow. She looked past me, not at me, like she could not stand to meet my eyes. "I hope so," she said. The words hit the kitchen and stayed there. I felt something inside me drop away. It was not surprise. It was a kind of cold understanding. This was what years of fear had done to her. It had burned out the softer part and left only the part that protected. My daughter made a small whimper, and my wife flinched at the sound as if it reminded her she was still a mother and not just a fighter. My wife reached out with her swollen hands, then stopped, afraid to touch the baby with blood on her. Her lips trembled. Her jaw worked like she was chewing on a thought she could not swallow. Then her face changed. The anger drained. The speed drained. What remained was shock, raw and trembling. Her shoulders began to shake. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and made a sound that was half sob, half choke. I did not move toward her. I did not know what I could offer that would not break us both. She turned away and walked toward the bathroom, one careful step at a time, leaving small red smears on the doorframe where her arm brushed it. I heard the bathroom door close. I heard the lock click. Then I heard the shower turn on, hard and fast, like she wanted the water to hit her with force. I stood alone again. I laid my daughter in her bassinet in our bedroom and stayed with her until her breathing steadied. I checked her cuts one more time, my fingers barely touching her skin. They looked like scratches. They looked like nothing, but I knew what they meant. In the kitchen, I wiped the table without thinking. I rinsed the cloth. I stared at the phone and did not pick it up. Every choice felt like stepping off a cliff. After a long time, the shower stopped. My wife came out wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. Her hands looked cleaner but more swollen, the skin stretched tight across the knuckles. She sat at the kitchen table like her legs had stopped working. She stared at the wall and breathed through her mouth. Neither of us said his name. It was as if saying it would pull him back into the room, or pull us back into the bedroom where it had happened. Minutes passed, then more. The house stayed quiet in a way I did not trust. Quiet could mean he had run. Quiet could mean he was lying still. Quiet could mean anything. My wife's eyes finally found mine. They were red, empty. She looked older than she had that morning. I wanted to tell her we had to call someone. I wanted to tell her we had to do the right thing. I wanted to tell her we could not leave him there, whatever he was. But the words stuck behind my teeth, because the truth was also there. If we called for help, the help would not just come for him. It would come for us. Police questions, my daughter's cuts, our locks, the years of hidden fear, my wife's fists, my silence. And under all of that, another fear, one that made my stomach twist. If he lived, and if he came back from this, what would he do next? I sat down across from my wife, and we stared at the same spot on the wall like it might tell us what to do. Then a sound came from the hallway. Not footsteps, not a voice. A low, wet cough. My wife's head snapped up. Her eyes widened. For a second she looked like she might stand, then she froze like her body had turned to stone. Another sound followed, a scrape against the floor, slow and weak. He was alive. My heart began to pound so hard it hurt. My mouth went dry. I listened, trying to place the sound. It came from the back bedroom, the same room where the crib stood, the same room where the knife had been. My wife whispered, barely audible, "No." I stood up. I did not tell her to stay. I did not ask her to come. I walked into the hallway alone, each step heavy, like the air had thickened. The bedroom door was still open from earlier. The lock was still turned, but the door hung loose, as if even it did not know what it was meant to protect anymore. I stopped at the threshold and looked inside. The room looked wrong. The crib sat where it always had, innocent and bright. The blanket lay half pulled, twisted from when I had grabbed the baby. A picture frame lay broken near the dresser. The air smelled sour, sweat, and something metallic. My son lay on the floor near the wall, curled on his side. He moved just enough to prove he was not a body. His breathing came in short, shallow pulls. One eye was swollen, nearly shut. His cheek was bruised dark. His mouth had dried blood at the corner. His hands were tucked close to his face, still trying to protect it even now, even when no one was striking him anymore. He looked smaller than he had in the kitchen that morning. Not because he had shrunk, but because the certainty had been beaten out of him, and what remained was just a boy shaped like a threat. He turned his head slightly and saw me. His good eye opened wider. His lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then he tried again, and I heard a thin whisper that might have been my name or might have been nothing. I stood there and felt my mind split again. A part of me wanted to kneel beside him, to check his breathing, to lift him, to call an ambulance. Another part of me stayed cold and still, staring at him and thinking about the knife gliding along my baby's face. After years of fear, we had been staring at a new fear. What we had allowed. I backed out of the doorway and closed the door halfway, not locking it, just narrowing the view, like that could narrow what we had done. I walked back to the kitchen where my wife waited, her hands clenched together like she could still feel his bones under her fists. I looked at the phone again. Now we had to choose. Call for help or do nothing. I did not pick up the phone. My wife sat at the table with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles turned white, even through the swelling. I stood by the wall near the sink, staring at the receiver like it was a loaded weapon. The baby slept in our bedroom, finally exhausted, with thin red lines on her face that made my stomach twist every time I pictured them. I had seen my son breathing on that floor. I had seen his eye track me. That should have pushed me to call an ambulance. It should have pushed me to call the police and say my child had tried to kill my other child. Instead, I did nothing. I told myself it was shock. I told myself I needed time to think. I told myself I could not trust what would happen if uniforms filled our hallway. I imagined my son waking up angry in a hospital bed. I imagined him telling strangers whatever story protected him. I imagined my wife in handcuffs. I imagined my daughter taken away while people decided what kind of parents we were. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was afraid of him, even hurt. My wife broke the silence first. Her voice sounded scraped raw, like it had dragged over gravel. If we called, she said, they would bring him back. She did not mean back to the house that hour. She meant back to our lives, back into rooms with keys, back into nights with footsteps. I looked at her and understood that she was not only thinking about consequences, she was thinking about survival. Her eyes did not soften when she spoke. They stayed hard, fixed on something I could not see. I nodded once, because nodding was easier than speaking. That was the moment we crossed a line that I could never explain in a clean sentence. We did not plan it in advance. We did not say, let him die. We did not say, let him suffer. We did not even say, we will hide this. We simply chose not to invite anyone into our house to witness what had happened. They did not throw him out. They moved themselves out. We had an unused basement suite under our bungalow. It had been a storage space and a half-finished idea, with a small bathroom, a little sitting area, and a separate entrance around the side. We had never lived in it. We had never needed it. That day, it became our lifeboat. We carried what we could without making noise. Diapers, bottles, a kettle, a few blankets. I moved slow, listening for any sound upstairs. Every creak made my muscles jump. My wife moved like a machine, still trembling but focused. She did not go near the back bedroom again. When I went up once to grab formula from the kitchen cabinet, I stayed near the doorway like a thief in my own home. I listened. I heard nothing. I did not check on my son again. I told myself that if he needed water, he could reach the bathroom. If he needed food, there was food. That was the story. I used to make it sound less like abandonment. Before we went down, I left a loaf of bread on the counter. I left a jar of peanut butter. I filled a pitcher with water and set it beside the sink. I opened the fridge and made sure there were leftovers he could reach. I did not write a note. I did not want proof. I did not want a message that could be held up later as a confession of what I had done. I also did not want to speak to him, even through paper. When we moved into the basement, we locked the door at the top of the stairs. We pulled a chair under the knob like it could stop a person who had already stopped at nothing. We checked the small basement windows. We shut curtains that had not been used in years. We set the phone near the mattress on the floor where we laid the baby, and we kept it there like a weapon we might finally use. My wife sat with her back against the wall, her swollen hands resting on her knees. She stared at the stairwell door as if it might open by itself. She did not cry again. She looked emptied out. I listened for him. Above us, the house made its usual sounds, but now every sound felt like a message. A footstep, a cabinet closing, water running, silence, more silence. My mind tried to map his movements like a guard tracking a prisoner, except he was not the prisoner. We were. The days that followed blurred together in my memory as one long-held breath. We stayed downstairs. We used the separate entrance. We did not turn on the upstairs lights at night. We spoke in low voices. We kept the baby close enough that my wife could touch her in the dark without reaching. And we did not call anyone. Years later, when I finally told this story out loud, people judged the choice the way people always did when they felt safe behind distance. I read their words and felt my stomach tighten, because each camp believed it had the only truth. Some took one look at the knife over the crib and decided nothing else mattered. They said the infant's safety was the only priority. They said trust ended the moment the blade touched skin. They said my hands cleaning those cuts in the kitchen were the only sane thing I did that day. They spoke like the danger stayed alive forever, and in my house it did. I understood them. I also knew fear did not erase consequence. Others said we still had a duty of care, even for a violent child. They said that once the knife was gone and the baby was safe, we had to seek medical help. They said my wife crossed a line when she kept hitting after he was down. They said I crossed a line when I walked away. They said two wrongs did not become safety. They became a new kind of harm. I understood them too, and that understanding hurt more, because it carried a truth I could not push away. Then there were the people who asked where the institutions were. They asked why doctors and schools and therapy did not contain the risk long before a baby bled in a crib. They argued about what options existed back then. They talked about separate classrooms, medications, specialists, and what should have happened. They treated our life like a case file they could fix with better steps. All I could say was that we had tried, we had begged, we had warned, we had built locks and counted knives and still ended up in that hallway with shaking hands and a key that did not turn fast enough. Fear explained our choice, but it did not clean it. Down in that basement, with the baby finally sleeping and my wife's bruised hands resting in her lap, I listened to the ceiling and realized we had created a new kind of home. Over the next weeks, the house became two separate worlds. The first night in the basement, I barely blinked. Every time the house settled, I heard it as footsteps. Every time the pipes clicked, I heard it as a knife drawer opening. My wife lay on the mattress with the baby pressed to her chest, her swollen hands resting like dead weights on the blanket. She stared at the stairwell door as if she could see through it. Above us, the main floor existed like another country. At first there was nothing, not even a cough. It made my skin prickle because silence from my son had never meant peace. It had always meant planning. On the second day I heard movement, slow dragging steps, a cupboard opening, water running for a short time then stopping. I pictured him holding a glass with shaking hands. I pictured him staring at his reflection, swollen and bruised, and deciding what to do to us next. My wife did not go upstairs. She did not ask me to. When she spoke at all, her voice stayed low and simple. Is she breathing okay? Is the door locked? Did you hear that? I returned to work because rent and food did not stop just because fear moved into the basement with us. I left through the separate entrance before sunrise. I walked to my car like I expected him to step out from behind the fence. I checked the back seat before I drove. I kept my hands tight on the wheel and my eyes on every mirror. At work I acted normal because people noticed anything else. I nodded in meetings. I lifted boxes. I answered questions. Inside, I stayed in the hallway of that bungalow, turning a key in a lock that had not been enough. Every hour I imagined my wife alone downstairs with the baby. I imagined my son finding the stairwell door. I imagined him breaking it. I imagined my wife trying to fight with swollen hands while holding an infant. I called home from a pay phone and listened for my wife's voice. When she answered, I listened past her, searching for any sound that did not belong. She always told me the same thing. He stayed upstairs. I heard him once or twice. The baby slept. Her tone never changed, but her breathing did. She sounded like she had been holding her breath until the phone rang. At night, when I returned, we ate in silence. The basement felt smaller every day, as if the walls pushed inward. The baby sensed something and cried more than she used to. My wife walked in circles with her, rocking and whispering until her own legs shook. Above us, my son moved like a ghost. Some nights I heard him packing. Some nights I heard a chair scrape. Once I heard a drawer slam hard, followed by a long stillness that made my stomach clench. I stayed by the stairwell door with a hammer in my hand, listening for the next sound. Nothing followed. I began to understand the new shape of our life. We were not living together anymore. We were surviving under the same roof. The third week, the pattern shifted. There were longer stretches of quiet. The footsteps became less frequent. The water ran less. It was as if he had either healed enough to move quietly or he had stopped caring about being heard. Then one night the house exploded. A crash came from upstairs, sharp and heavy, like a table being flipped. Another crash followed, then a fast series of impacts that sounded like dishes breaking or furniture being thrown. The noise rolled across the ceiling above us and made dust fall from the basement rafters. The baby startled awake and screamed. My wife's arms clamped around her so tight the baby's cry changed into a strangled wail. My wife rocked her hard, eyes wide, listening. I stood with my back against the stairwell door, both hands braced as if my body alone could hold it shut. My heart hammered so violently that my vision pulsed. The smashing continued. A cabinet door slammed over and over. Something heavy dragged across the floor. Then a sound like a fist hitting the wall again and again, fast and frantic. I waited for him to come down. I waited for the doorknob to turn. It never did. After a long time, the noise stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence after felt thick, almost wet. I realized I had been breathing in shallow bursts, and my throat hurt from it. My wife whispered, barely moving her lips, "Do not go up." I did not. That was the part that people understood the least when I later wrote about it. They asked why I did not check. They asked if I thought he was hurting himself. They asked if I thought he was setting the house on fire. They asked 100 questions that all came down to one. Why did you look away again? I had asked myself the same thing in quieter words. In that basement, I told myself that any step up those stairs was an invitation. That if I opened the door, I gave him a chance to see the baby. That if I crossed into his space, he could pull me in and close the door behind me. I told myself I was protecting my family. I also knew I was afraid. Years later, strangers gave that fear a name. They said it read like trauma shutdown. They pointed out how my mind narrowed until there was only one task left: keep the baby alive, keep her close, keep danger on the other side of a locked door. Some said my blank thinking was a freeze response, not a choice. Others said explanation was not the same as justification. They said fear might describe my silence, but it did not wash it clean. They said the moment my son was down on that bedroom floor, my duty changed. They said I should have called for help, even if it hurt us, even if it dragged our secrets into daylight. I could not argue with them without lying. Another group of people read the same weeks and saw a different problem. They said my son was not only a danger to us. They said he was a danger to anyone. They said that by keeping quiet, we might have pushed the risk onto strangers. They argued that reporting him could have prevented harm later. They asked what happened after he left and what my silence might have allowed. I never claimed he hurt anyone else. I still did not know. But the question sat in my chest like a stone, because it was a question I could not answer with certainty. Then there were people who blamed us for building the pressure in the first place. They said our house had become a pressure cooker, locks and shouting and fear feeding fear until it boiled over. They said my wife's rage and my withdrawal had made him worse. They said the baby took our attention and he escalated to take it back. Others pushed back and said the pattern existed from his earliest years, before any baby, before any locked doors, before any of our choices that day. They said we did not create the fire, we only failed to contain it. All I could admit was the truth I had tried to hide from myself. After my daughter was born, I had pulled back from my son emotionally. I had done it slowly, like moving away from a barking dog while pretending I was not afraid. I had stopped seeing him as a child and started seeing him as a threat. I had acted like a man protecting his home, not a father protecting a son. By the end of the third week, even the occasional footsteps upstairs stopped. No packing, no water, no cupboards, no doors. Just a steady quiet that did not feel like peace. It felt like absence. One morning, after my wife finally slept for more than an hour straight, I stood at the stairwell door and held the key in my hand. The metal felt cold, even though the basement was warm. I listened for anything above us. Nothing answered. I opened the lock slowly and lifted the door just enough to see the bottom step, then the next. I kept my body low, as if he might be waiting at the top with another blade. I told myself I only needed to check the kitchen. I told myself I only needed to see if the phone line was still connected, if the house was still standing, if the upstairs had become a trap. I stepped onto the stairs, 1 foot at a time, moving as quietly as I could. The air changed as I climbed. It smelled stale, like the house had been holding its breath. When my head rose above the floor level, I stopped and listened again. There was no sound of breathing, no shifting, no movement at all. Upstairs was quiet, too quiet. I climbed the last step like I expected a hand to shoot out and grab my ankle. The living room looked the same at first glance, but the air felt wrong, heavy and stale, as if the house had been sealed for years instead of weeks. I moved slowly, keeping my shoulders tight, listening for any sign of breathing, any floorboard settling under a hidden weight. Nothing. Then I saw what he had done. A chair lay on its side near the hallway, one leg snapped. The front room lamp had been knocked over and the shade was crushed. The picture frames on the wall had been pulled down, not dropped by accident but torn away. In the kitchen, cupboard doors hung open like broken mouths. Plates and glass lay shattered on the linoleum, swept into rough piles as if he had kicked them around for fun. The phone line had been ripped from the wall. I stared at the dangling cord and felt a cold wave move through me. It was not just damage. It was a message. It told me he had thought about control. It told me he had decided what we could and could not do. I walked toward the back bedroom and stopped before the doorway. My throat tightened the same way it had the day I saw him at the crib. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The room was empty. The crib still stood against the wall, clean and quiet, like it had never held a screaming baby. The dresser drawers were half open. The bedspread had been pulled off and lay in a twisted heap. On the floor, the broken frame still lay where it had fallen weeks ago. My son was gone. I stood there too long, waiting for my eyes to adjust, waiting to see him in a corner, waiting for him to rise. The silence stayed complete. I checked the bathroom, empty. I checked his room. The mattress had been stripped. His closet stood open. A few hangers swung slightly, though there was no breeze. His shoes were gone. The back door was unlocked. I did not remember unlocking it. I did not remember leaving it that way. The lock looked scratched, as if something hard had been forced into it, a key or a screwdriver. The door itself was shut, but it had not been shut with care. It sat slightly off, like it had been slammed. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by broken dishes, and tried to understand what I felt. Fear came first. Not the quick fear of a loud noise, but the long fear of a predator leaving the cage and disappearing into the neighborhood. I imagined him walking down the street with bruises still blooming on his face. I imagined him knocking on a stranger's door for help, or lying about what happened. I imagined police arriving anyway, not because we called, but because he did. Then another feeling rose under that fear, and it made me sick with myself. Relief. The house felt lighter without him in it. The air felt less watched. The quiet did not feel like a trap anymore. It felt like space. I went back down to the basement and told my wife he was gone. She did not ask where he went. She did not ask if he was alive. She closed her eyes and let out a breath that sounded like the first breath she had taken in weeks. Then she pulled the baby close and rocked her, and I saw her mouth form a silent word that might have been thank you, or might have been forgive me. We stayed cautious anyway. We did not run upstairs and celebrate. We did not throw open windows. We moved like people who expected the danger to come back through any door at any time. In the days that followed, I cleaned the shattered glass with thick gloves and a stiff broom. I patched holes in drywall where something heavy had hit again and again. I replaced the phone line and checked it 3 times a day. I repaired a cabinet door that had been torn off its hinges. I carried broken furniture out to the curb in the early morning before neighbors walked by. Months passed in repairs and in pretending nothing had happened. I learned how to answer questions without answering them. If someone asked why we kept to ourselves, I said the baby had been fussy. If someone asked about the noise they heard that night, I said something fell in the kitchen. If someone asked about our son, I said he was staying with friends, or he was between programs, or he was not home much anymore. I lived inside those lies until they felt like part of my skin. At night I checked locks even though he was gone. I checked windows. I checked the backyard gate. I slept in broken pieces, waking at every sound. When a car door slammed outside, my heart raced. When footsteps passed on the sidewalk, I held my breath and listened until they faded. The danger left the house, but it did not leave our minds. For years, I kept expecting him to return. Every time the phone rang late, my stomach turned. Every time someone knocked on the door unexpectedly, my wife moved the baby behind her without thinking, even after the baby became a toddler and then a child. Even when our daughter laughed in the living room, my mind stayed half in the hallway, waiting for a shadow to appear. Eventually, we moved. We told ourselves it was for more space, for a better neighborhood, for the schools. The truth was that the bungalow felt contaminated. Too many memories lived in its walls. Too many locks. Too many nights in the basement. In the new house, we installed stronger doors anyway. We kept keys close. We never fully stopped listening. Decades passed, and my son never contacted us. I never contacted him either. That fact followed me like a second shadow. People wanted a clean ending. They wanted me to say I searched. They wanted me to say I tried. The truth was that I feared what I would find, and I feared what I would feel if I found him. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I told myself he had started a new life. Sometimes I told myself he was in prison. Sometimes I told myself he was dead and I would never know. Each story felt both comforting and cruel. When I later wrote this down, the arguments returned, even though the years had made the story cold and distant. Some people did not believe it at all. They asked for missing details. They asked how a child could vanish without police reports. They asked how neighbors could not notice. They asked why hospitals did not call. They focused on the fact that there had been no official involvement, as if the lack of paperwork proved the lack of pain. Some suggested I had hidden more than I admitted. Some said I had minimized my role, that I had used careful words to soften what I allowed. I understood that suspicion, because if I had read it as a stranger, I might have questioned it too. I could not provide neat proof. I could only provide the account I carried in my body. That was the problem with family horror. It happened behind doors, and the people inside those doors often did everything they could to keep it that way. Others reacted in a way that hurt for different reasons. They felt compassion for everyone, even my son. They said a child like him did not become that way without something broken deep inside. They argued he might have needed containment, not abandonment. They imagined him stumbling away injured and alone, and they felt grief for a life that went wrong from the start. They still said my daughter's safety came first, but they rejected cruelty. They said fear and harm could exist at the same time, and choosing safety did not require choosing revenge. That was the hardest camp to read, because it forced me to hold two truths at once. My son had been dangerous. My daughter had been helpless. My wife had reacted like a mother animal protecting her young, and I had stood by. But my son had also been a child once. He had been a baby who cried until our nerves frayed. He had grown into something none of the doctors could name in a way that saved us. He had become a problem the world did not know how to hold, and when the moment came, we chose the simplest answer. We stepped back. Now in old age, living in my daughter's home with her family around me, I still felt the split inside myself. I could love the child my son used to be and fear the teenager he became. I could condemn what he did in that nursery and still wonder what happened to him after he walked out our back door. And I could hate myself for one quiet thought that never fully died. Part of me had been glad he was gone. If you were the father, would you have felt guilt or relief or both? My wife died on a quiet afternoon, and the house did not make room for it the way it should have. There were no slammed doors, no screaming, no sudden footsteps above our heads, only a slow, ordinary stillness that felt wrong because I had spent most of my marriage waiting for violence to return. When she was gone, the waiting did not stop. It simply lost its target. After the funeral, I packed what I could carry and moved in with my daughter and her family. She was an adult then, steady and kind. She had a spouse who treated me like I belonged. They gave me a small room with a window that looked out onto a yard where my grandchildren played. Their laughter was real laughter, not the sharp laughter I remembered from my son when he thought he had control. That sound should have been a cure. Instead, it sometimes opened old doors in my head. The smallest things pulled me back. A baby crying in a grocery store aisle, a child shrieking in play and then going silent, the click of a lock, a kitchen drawer sliding shut too fast. I jumped at those noises as if I still lived in that bungalow. I still checked the back door at night even when my daughter told me it was secure. I still counted time in gaps between sounds, the way I did when we lived in the basement and listened to my son move above us. I rarely spoke about it until I started therapy. I went because my daughter asked, and because I had begun waking up with my heart racing, my hands numb, my mouth full of words I could not say. The therapist was calm and structured. He did not push me for the most shocking details. He asked me what I felt, and that question almost made me laugh because feelings were the part I had learned to bury. He told me to write it down. Not to excuse it, not to prove anything, not to win an argument. He told me to write it down so the memory stopped living only in my body. I did as he said. I wrote late at night when the house was asleep, when the hallway outside my room was dark and safe, when my daughter's children breathed softly behind their doors and no one screamed. The more I wrote, the more I understood that the question was not only what we did, it was what it did to us. My wife had been a boxer, yes, strong, capable, trained. But the part people did not see was how tired she had become. Years before the knife, she had flinched at sudden movement. She had slept with her shoulders tense. She had learned to listen for danger the way other mothers listened for a baby waking. When our daughter was born and she was calm, my wife acted like she had been allowed to breathe for the first time in decades. Then the knife happened and the breathing turned into punching. After that day, even when our son was gone, my wife never fully returned. She smiled at our daughter. She held her. She protected her. But when she thought no one watched, she stared into space like she was still in that bedroom. Some nights she woke up and went to the kitchen to check the drawers, even though we had moved houses. Sometimes I saw her looking at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I loved her, and I feared what that day had turned her into. Both were true at the same time. I asked myself for years what I would have done if I had been stronger. I kept returning to the same the moment I left the room holding the baby while my wife kept striking. People called it cowardice. People called it survival. People called it evil. I called it a failure that felt like safety. In therapy, I admitted something I had never said out loud, not even to my wife. Part of me had been glad. Glad that someone finally stopped him. Glad that the power in our house shifted for once. Glad that I did not have to be the one to do it. Glad, even as I held my baby and cleaned her face, that the threat on the other side of the wall was the one bleeding. That admission did not make me feel honest. It made me feel stained. I still did not know where my son was. I had not heard his voice in over 30 years. There were no letters, no phone calls, no sightings I could trust. Every now and then I wondered if I might have passed him on a street without knowing. I imagined a man with his shoulders hunched, his face changed by time, his eyes still cold. People asked why I never searched. They asked it gently sometimes, like they expected a father's heart to override everything. They asked it harshly other times, like they wanted to punish me with the same question until I broke. The answer stayed the same, and it did not become easier with age. I did not want contact. I told myself it was because my daughter deserved peace. I told myself it was because my grandchildren deserved safety. I told myself I was too old to bring that danger to their door. Those were true, but not complete. The fuller truth was that I did not trust what I would become if he came back into my life. I did not trust my own reactions. I did not trust the part of me that had felt relief when he disappeared. I did not trust the part of me that might feel relief again if something final happened. And I did not trust the guilt, because guilt could make a man do foolish things in the name of making a story cleaner than it was. Some nights when the house was quiet and my daughter's family slept, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the normal sounds of a safe home. Heat through vents, a refrigerator hum, a child turning in sleep. Those sounds should have been comforting. Instead, they reminded me how fragile safety was and how quickly it could turn into screaming, locked doors, and the sound of fists landing. I thought about my son as a baby and then as a teenager with a knife. I thought about my wife wiping blood from her hands in the shower. I thought about the basement weeks, the phone line ripped from the wall, the back door left unlocked. I thought about the choice not to call anyone and the way that choice hardened into the rest of our lives. When people asked me what I wanted now, at the end, I never had a clean answer. I wanted my daughter and her children to stay safe. I wanted my wife to be remembered as more than one violent day. I wanted to stop replaying the moment I walked away. I never fully did. So I left the story where it belonged, in its discomfort, and I asked the only question that still mattered. What was the line between protection and revenge when the threat lived inside your family? If you had been in my place, in that kitchen with a bleeding infant and a locked door down the hall, which duty would have mattered more in that moment? The duty to protect the vulnerable, or the duty to stop violence once the immediate threat ended? And why?